stolen from us, and a new curriculum established, new language, new script, and of course, new laws. The British laws are very different from the Brehon laws. 700 years to actually establish their British, even though they'd been here for 500 years before that in the form of the Normans.
Oh, wow. Wow.
There were over 4.5 million people died in the hunger part of it. And others were removed from the land by force and by necessity. Anybody who could survive and get out that didn't have land or means to survive had to get on what were called famine ships. They were more like coffin ships, because many of the people were leaving were so sick and impoverished and on the brink of death by that point that mostly 2/3 would die along the way just before they got to Canada or to the New World, forever out of here. So it was very, very, it's beyond words when you see the pictures of the people and the descriptions of the Irish coming ashore in New York and Canada and New Orleans, like that. They were the most wretched, just, clinging to bare life. Now, I have here an educational book from the Irish educational system of the day. It was founded by the Christian Brothers, a group that took over the educational system in Ireland from the 1800s, mid-1800s. And I could go through that book to every town and in Ireland, and it would tell you what the population was, what the industries were, how many sheep, how many cows, how many bulls. Everything is like a census, county by county. And by 1890, the population was reduced by 4 more million. They introduced alcohol, gin drinking, and the cheapest, most toxic thing possible was ether that people drank, and it just completely decimated the population as well. That's where we get the reputation of these lazy, drunkard Irish that are good for nothing. They labeled us that and took it ahead of us to the New World, so we couldn't even get jobs or get respect or get any established footing even in the New World. You see? So, this take down the destruction of a human population by these parasites using whatever toxin and intoxication is cheapest and easiest. It's the same MO. Later, Queen Victoria would use her gunships to the Boxer Revolution in China and put down that revolt because she was taking down that country through opium. Everywhere, the CIA, the Golden Triangle, the Vietnam War. Then you have every conflict, there's drugs involved. The war, the Vatican agents, the CIA, Catholics in America, doing all of this shit on behalf of.
You just made me realize, I just had an epiphany when you were talking, that they really use these tools all over the world, and they've been like, it's the same thing. It's war, it's famine, it's some sort of a stimulant, it's something, man. And it's interesting because it turns out that the spirits, as they call it, like alcohol, as you said, it affects us on a genetic level, man, because they did the same thing with the Slavs. Because if you look at the Soviet Union before the 1960s, it was the least drinking country in the world, and then all of a sudden, in a couple of years, it became the #1 drinking country in the world. As you know, like you said, they say drunkard Irish. They say the same thing about Russians, man. The Russians are always drunk, and they drink vodka instead of, water and everything. So your original language is Gaelic?
Yes, yes.
So
And it used to have its own script. When I was in a child, up until the age of, say, 10 years old, 11 years old, Irish as a subject in school had its own curriculum and its own script. But then, sometime around 1967, they abolished the ancient Irish script and the handwriting and all of that, and it was disposed of. And many of our that immediately divorced so many people from our traditional language and from our ancient books. This was at the seat of learning of Europe. And we have many, many books which were stolen by the English, by the British when they left with a treaty in 1922. They took our Psalters of Cashel, the Annals of the Great Masters, the Annals of Leinster, and they were all taken to the British Museum, and they're only accessible by qualified academics who have special permission to access them. But this way, our language, culture, history, all separated, stolen from us, and a new curriculum established, new language, new script, and of course, new laws. The British laws are very different from the Brehon laws. And it took them 700 years to actually establish their British, even though they'd been here for 500 years before that in the form of the Normans. These, many of them established great pieces of land on the land of Ireland, and they intermarried with the Irish chieftains, and they actually, over time, became more Irish than the Irish themselves, because they realized very quickly they were coming in with a set of laws and a legal structure onto a people that already had a more sophisticated one by far. And they were never accepted, and their laws were never accepted. And very quickly, it didn't take them long to realize that the Irish were far more manageable when they're left to manage their own civil affairs according to a very sophisticated and refined, tried and tested, thousands of years old system. So it really wasn't until the 1800s that they kicked ass with our Brehon laws out the door completely and established the legal system that we have today, which is coming from the British accredited registry, the bar. So all of our solicitors, all of our barristers have a sworn oath of allegiance to this private black society, which gets its laws, of course, from the same place as everybody else. They are given their authority by Rome. So Rome gives every regal established system on the planet that we still have today, including the King of Morocco. They still bend the knee, and they have that title under the behest of the Vatican. They're all Vatican owned and Vatican controlled, essentially, ever since. So people don't realize that all of the legal systems and regal systems of the world presently today are all bent the knee and coming under maritime Roman law. So you were mentioning also, Jim, regarding the haplogroups, the blood groups, very close between Ireland and the Slavic people. Trinity College and Edinburgh, I believe, Aberdeen, a genetic study maybe 20 years ago to find where the oldest established group of Caucasians in the world resides. And this study took blood samples from all over the Caucasian world, white people everywhere. And they're finding quite astounded a lot of people to find that the most intact blood group in the world is along the western seaboard of Ireland, of the Caucasian,
Yeah.
the oldest, the most intact. Now, it is a very, very small group of people, mainly making up the Irish traveller community, our Gypsy community, the people that were originally displaced from their land and sent to, as Cromwell put it, they can go to hell or to Connacht. Now, this area, Connacht,
those who the Pikeys are, like, for you guys, they are the original people that were kicked off.
They're the oldest, yes, and they were originally, tinsmiths and craftspeople that got disinherited from the land. You have to understand, when Cromwell came in here, apart from the butchery he did, which killed 500,000 people, he took the country town by town and just gathered up the Catholics. The men were sent into indentured slavery, the ones that were fit enough for that. Most of the men were killed because they were resisting. And the women and children were shipped by the hundreds of thousands to the New World colonies of Barbados, Bahamas, the Carolinas, Virginia, these countries, these states. And they made up the breeding population for the new slaves that were being brought in to build the New World. So if you were to go to many of the movie stars in Hollywood today, the black movie stars in particular, and you go back into their genealogy, I guarantee you 4 or 5 generations, they've got an Irish or grandmother, okay?
Wow.
Because they were used as breeding brood hens, and that's where most of the subsequent slave population to do the cotton, to do all of that in America, because between 1600 and 1690, there were more Irish slaves, indentured servants, they were called, sent to the New World from Ireland than from Africa. I talked about
that on my channel. There was around like 10,000, originally like 10,000 Irish slaves that people don't want to talk about, man.
They became known as redlegs in the Carolinas and the plantations. The plantation owners would never leave these white. We were cheaper than the black slaves and considered more dangerous, never let into the house. And they were called redlegs because their skin burnt in the fields.
Yeah.
And Carolinas, Virginia today, there still be remembrance of them in terminology, at least. We were redleg. And cheaper on the slave market to buy and sell, and more disposable in the 1700s than black slaves. People have no idea of this. We were the first slaves of Europe.
Yeah. What's
Ireland was the first country that this regime took down, and we're on phase 2 now.
What's the percentage of Ireland right now that still know Gaelic?
That speak Gaelic. Lots of children have some knowledge of Gaelic because it's still in the curriculum in school. But by the time they finish 10 years of national school and secondary school, they come out with barely enough Gaelic. It's taught so badly and given such little emphasis that, it's not usable for most people. They can understand. If you were hearing fluent Irish spoken, they'd have a handle on maybe a third of it. But the population that speaks the language fluently would be less than 10%, probably less than 5%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing anything to fight that? Because as we know, one of the ways to conquer people is through language, man, because that changes your whole neuroscience in your brain, man.
Absolutely. The Irish language actually is so rich. It has 20 times the amount of words in it than the English language. If people only realize that. There's so many examples. Like, if you were to call somebody a fool in Irish, I mean, in English, you have a fool and you've got, idiot, and there's so many names, but in Ireland there's so many different types of a fool, from a lummox, a brelic, a falbashtakon, a stúcán. They're all different levels, descriptions of stupidity. You see, that's how nuanced and how refined the language was. You wouldn't just use a word that's a blanket word for a specific individual or case. People would look at you askance because it wouldn't hold any water for them. But a specific terminology would, and people would get it like that because it's a very colorful, picturesque language. And that's why even in literature, the Irish, like James Joyce and Goldsmith, our poets, they became very famous in the English language because we have a very natural, developed brain for language and imagery and the color of words. And I have a very good example of that.
Each word had substance, right? Like it wasn't just, that's the big difference between, let's say, English and the ancient languages, that each word had literally, a energy wave, a vibration, it had substance in it, man.